Private Pilot Oral Exam Guide. Airworthiness requirements. Aircraft certificates and documents. What documents are required on board an aircraft prior to flight? ARO, Airworthiness Certificate, Registration Certificate, Radio Station License if operating outside of the U.S., Operating Limitations, that includes AFM and POH and supplements, placards and markings, weight and balance data, compass deviation card, and an external data plate / serial number. What is an airworthiness certificate? An airworthiness certificate is issued by the FAA to an aircraft that has been proven to meet the minimum design and manufacturing requirements and is conditioned for safe operation. Under any circumstances, the aircraft must meet the requirements of the original type certificate or it is no longer airworthy. These certificates come in two different classifications: standard airworthiness and special airworthiness. What is the difference between standard and special airworthiness certificates? Standard airworthiness certificates, white paper, are issued for normal, utility, acrobatic, commuter, or transport category aircraft. Special airworthiness certificates, pink paper, are issued for primary, restricted, or limited category aircraft and light sport aircraft. What is an experimental airworthiness certificate? A special airworthiness certificate in the experimental category is issued to operate an aircraft that does not have a type certificate or does not conform to its type certificate yet, is in a condition for safe operation. Additionally, this certificate is issued to operate a primary category kit build aircraft that was assembled without the supervision and quality control of the production certificate holder. Does an airworthiness certificate have an expiration date? No. A standard airworthiness certificate remains valid for as long as the aircraft meets its approved type design, is in condition for safe operation and preventative maintenance, and alterations are performed in accordance with parts 21, 43, and 91. Where must the airworthiness certificate be located? The certificate must be displayed at the cabin or cockpit entrance so that it is legible to passengers or crew. For an aircraft to be considered airworthy, what two conditions must be met? The aircraft must conform to its type design, type certificate. This is attained when the required and proper components are installed consistent with the drawings, specifications, and other data that are part of the type certificate. Conformity includes applicable supplemental type certificates and field approval alterations. The aircraft must be in condition for safe operation, referring to the condition of the aircraft in relation to wear and deterioration. Explain how the pilot determines if an aircraft conforms to its approved type design and is in condition for safe operation. For type design, a pilot must determine that the preventative maintenance and alterations have been performed in accordance to parts 21, 43, and 91, and that the aircraft is registered in the U.S. The pilot does this by ensuring that all the required inspections, maintenance, preventative maintenance, repairs, and alterations have been appropriately documented in the aircraft's maintenance records. For safe operation, the pilot conducts a thorough pre-flight inspection of the aircraft for wear and deterioration, structural damage, fluid leaks, tire wear, inoperative instruments and equipment, etc. If an unsafe condition exists or inoperative instruments or equipment are found, the pilot uses the guidance in 14 CFR section 91.213 for handling the inoperative equipment. What records or documents should be checked to determine that the owner or operator of an aircraft has complied with all the required inspections and airworthiness directives. The maintenance records, aircraft and engine logbooks. Each owner or operator of an aircraft shall ensure that the maintenance personnel make appropriate entries in the aircraft maintenance records indicating the aircraft has been approved for return to service. Who is responsible for ensuring that an aircraft is maintained in an airworthy condition? The owner or operator of an aircraft is primarily responsible for maintaining an aircraft in an airworthy condition. Describe some of the responsibilities an aircraft owner has pertaining to aircraft documents, maintenance, and inspections of the aircraft. Aircraft owners must: A. Have a current airworthiness certificate and aircraft registration in the aircraft. B. Maintain the aircraft in an airworthy condition, including compliance with all applicable airworthiness directives. C. Ensure maintenance is properly recorded. D. Keep abreast of current regulations concerning the operation of that aircraft. E. Notify the FAA Civil Aviation Registry immediately of any change of permanent mailing address or of the sale or export of the aircraft or of the loss of citizenship. F. Have a current FCC radio station license if equipped with radios, including emergency locator transmission, if operated outside of the U.S. What are airworthiness directives? An AD is the medium by which the FAA notifies aircraft owners and other potentially interested persons of unsafe conditions that may exist because of design defects, maintenance, or other causes, and specifies the condition under which the product may continue to be operated. ADs are regulatory in nature, and compliance is mandatory. It is the aircraft's owner or operator's responsibility to ensure the compliance with all pertinent ADs. What are the two types of ADs? ADs are divided into two categories: those of an emergency nature, requiring immediate compliance prior to further flight, and those of a less urgent nature, requiring compliance within a specific period of time. When are emergency ADs issued? An emergency AD is issued when an unsafe condition exists that requires immediate action by an owner or operator. The intent of an emergency AD is to rapidly correct an urgent safety of flight situation. All known owners and operators of affected U.S. registered aircraft or those aircraft that have affected product installed will be sent a copy of an emergency AD. While reviewing the aircraft logbooks, you discover that your aircraft is not in compliance with an AD's specified time or date. Are you allowed to continue to operate the aircraft until the next required maintenance inspection? Do the regulations allow any kind of buffer? The assumption that AD compliance is only required at the time of a required inspection, for example at a 100-hour or an annual inspection, is not correct. The required compliance time and date is specified in each AD, and no person may operate the affected product after expiration of that stated compliance time without an alternative method of compliance. You determine that you need to fly your aircraft with an expired AD to another airport where a repair facility can do the work required by the AD. How can you accomplish this? Unless the AD states otherwise, you may apply to the FAA for a special flight permit following the procedures in 14 CFR section 21.199. What is a type certificate data sheet? The FAA issues a type certificate when a new aircraft, engine, propeller, etc. is found to meet safety standards set forth by the FAA. The type certificate data sheet lists the specifications, conditions, and limitations under which airworthiness requirements were met for the specified product, such as engine make and model, fuel type, engine limits, airspeed limits, maximum weight, minimum crew, etc. What is a supplemental type certificate? A supplemental type certificate is the FAA's approval of a major change in the type design of a previously approved type certificated product. The certificate authorizes an alteration to an airframe, engine, or component that has been granted an approved type certificate. Sometimes alterations are made that are not specified or authorized in the TCDS. When that condition exists, the supplemental type certificate will be issued. Supplemental type certificates are considered a part of the permanent record of an aircraft and should be maintained as part of that aircraft's logs. What is an aircraft registration certificate? Before an aircraft can be flown legally, it must be registered with the FAA Aircraft Registry. The Certificate of Aircraft Registration, which is issued to the owner as evidence of the registration, must be carried in the aircraft at all times. Does an aircraft's registration certificate have an expiration date? Yes. A certificate of aircraft registration issued in accordance with 14 CFR section 47.31 expires 3 years after the last day of the month in which it was issued. A temporary certificate of registration is valid for no more than 90 days after the date the applicant signs the application. Where can you find information on the placards and marking information required to be in the airplane? The principal source of information for identifying the required airplane flight manuals, approved manual materials, markings, and placards is the FAA Type Certificate Datasheet or aircraft specification issued for each airplane eligible for an airworthiness certificate. The required placards are also reproduced in the limitations section of the airplane flight manual or as directed by an AD. What are several examples of placards and markings required in an airplane? Day, night, VFR, IFR placard. Flight maneuvers permitted placard. Caution, control lock removed before starting. Maneuvering speed. Compass calibration card. Markings. Airspeed indicator markings. Cockpit control markings. Fuel, oil, and coolant filler openings. Aircraft maintenance requirements. What are the required tests and inspections to be performed on an aircraft? Include inspections for IFR. Aviate. Annual inspection within the preceding 12 calendar months. Airworthiness directives and life-limited parts complied with, as required. VOR equipment check every 30 days for IFR operations. 100-hour inspection if used for hire or flight instruction in aircraft CFI provides. Altimeter, altitude reporting equipment, and static systems tested and inspected for IFR operations every 24 calendar months. Transponder tests and inspections every 24 calendar months. ELT, operation and battery condition, inspected every 12 calendar months. What is an annual inspection, and which aircraft are required to have annual inspections? An annual inspection is a complete inspection of an aircraft engine required by the regulations and is required to be accomplished every 12 calendar months on all certificated aircraft. Only an A&P technician holding an inspection authorization can conduct an annual inspection. What aircraft are required to have 100-hour inspections? All aircraft under 12,500 pounds used to carry passengers for hire. There are exceptions for turbojet, turbo power propeller, multi-engine airplanes, and turbine-powered rotorcraft. B. Aircraft used for flight instruction for hire when provided by the person giving the flight instruction. If an aircraft is operated for hire, is it required to have a 100-hour inspection as well as an annual inspection? Yes. If an aircraft is operated for hire, it must have a 100-hour inspection as well as an annual inspection when due. If not operated for hire, only an annual inspection is required. What is the difference between an annual inspection and a 100-hour inspection? The main difference is who is allowed to perform the inspection. Only an A&P with an inspection authorization form can perform an annual inspection. 100-hour inspection may be performed by any A&P mechanic. There is no inspection authorization form required. Part 43, Appendix D, Scope and Detail of the items to be included in an annual and 100-hour inspections, contains a list of the items to be checked during inspections. If an aircraft has been on a schedule of inspection every 100 hours, under what condition may it continue to operate beyond the 100 hours without a new inspection? The 100-hour limitation can be exceeded by not more than 10 hours while en route to a place where the inspection can be done. The excess time used to reach a place where the inspection can be done must be included in computing the next 100 hours of time in service. The annual inspection date has passed. Can an aircraft be operated to a location where the inspection can be performed? An aircraft overdue for an annual inspection may be operated under a special flight permit issued by the FAA for the purpose of flying the aircraft to a location where the annual inspection can be performed. However, all applicable ADs that are due must be complied with before the flight. What are special flight permits, and when are they necessary? A special flight permit may be issued for an aircraft that may not be currently meeting applicable airworthiness requirements, but is capable of safe flight. These permits are typically issued for the following purposes. A. Flying an aircraft to a base where repairs, alterations, or maintenance are to be performed, or to a point of storage. B. Delivering or exporting an aircraft. C. Production flight testing, new production aircraft. D. Evacuating aircraft from the area of impending danger. E. Conducting customer demonstration flights in new production aircraft that have satisfactorily completed production flight tests. How are special flight permits obtained? If a special flight permit is needed, assistance and the necessary forms may be obtained from the local FSDO or designated airworthiness representative. After aircraft inspections have been made and defects have been repaired, who is responsible for determining the aircraft is in an airworthy condition? The pilot in command of a civil aircraft is responsible for determining whether the aircraft is in a condition for safe flight. The pilot in command shall discontinue the flight when unairworthy mechanical, electrical, or structural conditions occur. What regulations apply concerning the operation of an aircraft that has had alterations or repairs which may have substantially affected its operation in flight? No person may operate or carry passengers in any aircraft that has undergone maintenance, preventative maintenance, rebuilding, or alteration that may have appreciably changed its flight characteristics or substantially affected its operation in flight until an appropriately rated pilot with at least a private pilot certificate A. Flies the aircraft, B. Makes an operational check of the maintenance performed or alteration made, and C. Logs the flight in the aircraft records. Can a pilot legally conduct flight operations with known inoperative equipment on board? Yes, under specific conditions. Part 91 describes acceptable methods for the operation of an aircraft with certain inoperative instruments and equipment that are not essential for safe flight. They are A. Operation of an aircraft with a minimum equipment list as authorized by 14 CFR section 91.213a, or B, operation of an aircraft without an MEL under 14 CFR section 91.213d. What limitations apply to aircraft operations conducted under the deferral provisions of 14 CFR section 91.213d? When inoperative equipment is found during pre-flight or prior to departure, the decision should be to cancel the flight, obtain maintenance prior to the flight, or to defer the item or equipment. Maintenance deferrals are not used for in-flight discrepancy. The manufacturer's AFM or POH procedures are to be used in those situations. During the pre-flight inspection in an aircraft that doesn't have an MEL, you notice that an instrument or equipment item is inoperative. Describe how you will determine if the aircraft is still airworthy for flight. I will ask myself the following questions to determine if I can legally fly the airplane with the inoperative equipment item. A. Are the inoperative instruments or equipment part of a VFR day type certification? B. Are the inoperative instruments or equipment listed as required on the aircraft's equipment list or kinds of operations equipment list for the type of flight operation being conducted? Are the inoperative equipments or equipment required by 14 CFR section 91.205, section 91.207, or any other rule of Part 91 for the specific kind of flight operation being conducted? For example, VFR, IFR, day, or night. And D, are the inoperative instruments or equipment required to be operational by an AD? If the answer is yes to any of these questions, the aircraft is not airworthy and maintenance is required before I can fly. If the answer is no to any of these items, then the inoperative instruments or equipment must be removed by an A&P from the aircraft or deactivated and placarded inoperative. What are minimum equipment lists? The minimum equipment list is a precise listing of instruments, equipment, and procedures that allows an aircraft to be operated under specific conditions with inoperative equipment. The minimum equipment list is the specific inoperative equipment document for a particular make and model of aircraft by serial and registration numbers. The FAA approved MEL includes only those items of equipment that the FAA deems may be inoperative and still maintain an acceptable level of safety with appropriate conditions and limitations. For an aircraft with approved MEL, explain the decision sequence a pilot would use after discovering the position lights are inoperative. With an MEL, if the position lights were discovered inoperative prior to a daytime flight, the pilot would make an entry in the maintenance record or discrepancy record provided for that purpose. The item is either repaired or deferred in accordance with the MEL. Upon confirming that daytime flight with inoperative position lights is acceptable in accordance with the provisions of the MEL, the pilot would leave the position light switch off, open the circuit breaker, or whatever action is called for in the procedures document, and placard the position light switch as inoperative. Explain the limitations that apply to aircraft operations being conducted using a MEL. The use of an MEL for a small non-turbine powered airplane operated under Part 91 allows for the deferral of inoperative items or equipment. The FAA considers an approved MEL to be a supplemental type certificate issued to an aircraft by serial number and registration number. Once an operator requests an MEL and a letter of authorization is issued by the FAA, then the MEL becomes mandatory for that aircraft. All maintenance deferrals must be done in accordance with the terms and conditions of the MEL, and the operator-generated procedures document. What instruments and equipment are required for VFR day flight? For VFR flight during the day, the following instruments and equipment are required. A tomato flames, an anti-collision light system, a tachometer for each engine, oil pressure gauge for each engine, manifold pressure gauge for each altitude engine, altimeter, temperature gauge for each liquid-cooled engine, oil temperature gauge for each air-cooled engine, fuel gauge indicating the quantity in each tank, flotation gear if operated for hire over water beyond power-off gliding distance from shore, landing gear position indicator if the airplane has retractable gear, an airspeed indicator, magnetic direction indicator, ELT, and safety belts. What instruments and equipment are required for VFR night flight? For VFR night flight, all the instruments and equipment for VFR day flight are required, plus the following: flaps, fuses, one spare set or 3 fuses for each kind required, and it has to be accessible to the pilot in flight, landing light, if the aircraft is operated for hire, anti-collision light system, position lights, source of electrical energy. Who may perform maintenance on an aircraft? FAA certificated A&P mechanic, an A&P mechanic with inspection authorization, an appropriately rated FAA certificated repair station, or the aircraft manufacturer. Define preventative maintenance. Preventative maintenance means simple or minor preservation operations and the replacement of small standard parts not involving complex assembly operations. Certificated pilots, excluding student pilots, sport pilots, recreational pilots, may perform preventative maintenance on any aircraft that is owned or operated by them, provided that aircraft is not used in air carrier service. Part 43, Appendix A, identifies typical preventative maintenance operations, which may include such basic items as oil changes, wheel bearing lubrication, hydraulic fluid for brakes and landing gear system. What logbook entry information is required of a person performing preventative maintenance? All pilots who maintain or perform preventative maintenance must make an entry in the maintenance record of the aircraft. The entry must include the description of the work, the date of the completion of the work performed, and the entry of the pilot's name, signature, certificate number, and type of certificate held. While inspecting the engine logbook of the rental aircraft you are planning to fly, you notice that the engine has exceeded the time between overhaul. Is it legal to fly this aircraft? Yes. Time between overhaul is computed by the engine manufacturer and is a reliable estimate of the number of hours the engine could perform reliably within the established engine parameters and still not exceed the service wear limits for overhaul for major component parts, such as the crankshaft, camshaft, cylinders, connecting rods, and pistons. Time between overhaul times are make and model specific, and the recommended overhaul service times are usually identified in the engine manufacturer's service bulletin or letter. For Part 91 operations, compliance to the TBO is not a mandatory maintenance requirement. What are several good reasons for an aircraft owner to comply with a TBO and the times recommended by the manufacturer? A. An overhaul at TBO will ensure safety and reliability. B. An engine overhaul at TBO is usually less expensive than an engine that has been run an additional 200 or 300 hours. C. Running the engine past TBO usually accelerates the overall wear of the engine, Due to bigger bearing tolerances, loss of protective materials such as plating or nitrating of the cylinder heads, and vibration caused by engine reciprocating parts that have worn unevenly and are now out of balance. Additional study questions. During pre-flight, you discovered that one of the position lights, installed equipment, is inoperative prior to the daytime flight. Can you legally conduct this flight? While en route on a VFR cross-country, you notice that your vertical speed indicator is inoperative during a descent to your first fuel stop. Can you legally continue your cross-country flight? If yes, what actions are required? How can a pilot determine if all applicable airworthiness directives have been compiled for his or her airplane? Explain how you will deactivate an item or system that has become inoperative in your airplane. Can you deactivate any item or system in the airplane? What is required? If the AFM for an aircraft you are about to fly is missing, what substitution may be made, if any? Are the AFM supplements required to be on board the airplane? As PIC, you have the responsibility for determining whether your aircraft is in a condition for safe flight. When flying rental aircraft, how can procedures regarding discrepancy records or squawk sheets affect the total risk of a flight? You have just completed the first leg of a long cross country, and notice that the oil level is approaching the 1 quart low mark. As a private pilot, can you add a quart of oil yourself, or is a mechanic required? What are special airworthiness safety bulletins, and are they regulatory? During your pre-flight inspection, you discover that the left main tire on your aircraft has a large flat spot with nylon cord showing. You wisely decide that this is unacceptable and that the tire should be replaced before the flight. Do the regulations allow the pilot to perform this maintenance, or must it be performed by a licensed mechanic? A 100-hour inspection was due at 3,302.5 hours. The 100-hour inspection was actually done at 3,309.5 hours. When is the next 100-hour inspection due?